afternoon. The Secretary General and the President will make opening remarks, and then we'll have time for a couple of questions. Secretary General.
President Duda, dear Andrzej, welcome back to the NATO Headquarters. It's always a pleasure to host you here, and thank you so much for your strong commitment to our alliance and for everything we do together to ensure our security. Poland is a highly valued NATO ally that makes major contributions to our shared security. You host one of NATO's multinational battle groups in the region. You contribute to NATO's Baltic air policing mission, and you host key facilities such as our multinational core northeast and a site for our ballistic missile defense. We met today at a critical time. We discussed Russia's massive military buildup in and around Ukraine. Russia now has deployed well over 100,000 troops with enabling capabilities, including medical units, command and control, and logistics. We also expect around 30,000 Russian troops to be deployed in Belarus, the largest military build-up there since the Cold War. These deployments are not justified, not transparent, and very close to NATO borders. Moreover, Russia has rescheduled its annual exercise of nuclear forces for this month. And we have seen Russia use military exercises before as a cover for aggressive actions. So NATO must remain vigilant and ready. We have already increased our presence in the eastern part of the alliance and the readiness of the NATO response force. We are also considering the deployment of additional battle groups to the southeastern part of the NATO alliance. I welcome that the United States is sending more troops to Poland, to Germany, and also to Romania. This is a powerful demonstration of American commitment to our alliance. Other allies are also contributing more forces to NATO on land, in the air, and at sea. Our deployments are defensive and proportionate. They send a clear message: NATO will do whatever is necessary to protect and defend all allies. At the same time, dialogue with Russia is even more important to find a political solution. Today, I reiterate my invitation to Russia to meet with NATO allies in the NATO-Russia Council. We are ready to listen to their concerns, to discuss NATO-Russia relations, risk reduction and transparency, arms control, disarmament and non-proliferation, and other issues that affect our security. But NATO will not compromise on core principles, our ability to protect and defend all allies, and the right of each nation to choose its own path. We discussed the recent joint statement by Russia and China, where for the first time China joins Russia in calling on NATO to stop admitting new members. This is an attempt to deny sovereign nations the right to make their own choices, a right enshrined in key international documents. NATO respects every country's decision to be part of an alliance or not. Our open door policy has been a historic success, spreading freedom and security across Europe. We must respect sovereign decisions, not return to an age of spheres of influence, where the big powers can tell others what they can or cannot do. So President Duda, Andrzej, thank you again for being here today, and NATO can count on Poland, and Poland can always count on NATO. Welcome.
Mr. Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, first and foremost, to you, Secretary General, for this opportunity. Thank you for being able to meet you today In connection with my stay here in Brussels, and I also had meetings here before, I met with the President of the European Commission and Mr. President of the European Council. I had important meetings, and at every meeting we discussed the security situation. We also raised the Ukrainian issue. We discussed the deadlock which we are faced with. Of course, we discussed as members of the European Union, but clearly and obviously we discussed also as NATO members, and we said that in both these aspects we need unity. We need to demonstrate that we act together, that we act jointly, that we have the same position here. And I'm happy that these important topics, important for the North Atlantic Alliance, were also discussed in our conversation with Secretary General today. Let me remind you, I had a meeting with President Volodymyr Zelensky. We talked at length about the current situation in Ukraine. That happened several days ago, that meeting. But recently, and to be more precise, in the last days, I have had a whole series of political meetings in Beijing in the margins of the inauguration of the Olympic Winter Games, but for the leaders of states, it always gives an opportunity to implement the so-called Olympic diplomacy. Among others, as part of my visit to Beijing, I had a bilateral meeting with the President of China, Mr. Xi Jinping. I shared with Secretary General what we discussed during that meeting, and also I conveyed my sentiment and my feeling concerning the security in the broadest geopolitical dimension of relations with NATO. I mentioned all the things that are important for us in making decisions within NATO. Speaking about the current aspects, I proposed, Mr. Secretary General, first of all, I said that we have no doubt whatsoever that we need the reinforcement along the eastern flank of the NATO alliance. We all can see what is happening. Russia is building up its military presence in our part of Europe. We are seeing more Russian troops arriving. They are arriving close to the Russian-Ukrainian border, but they are also being deployed to Belarus. And there, military maneuvers are scheduled to take place, but we are all looking at the situation with concern, because, as a matter of fact, this Russian presence is going to significantly change the security architecture in our part of Europe if these units, after the end of the exercise, do not return to their garrisons, but if they are left behind in Belarus. Then we can say that Russia will add another military district, and as a matter of fact, this military border between NATO and Russia will increase by another 1,200 kilometers, because this is the length of the Belarusian border with NATO countries today. Hence, there is such a concern. I think we must look at it. We must keep it on our radar. We have to pay attention to it, and we have to react. So generally, two basic elements I would like to stress. First and foremost, I believe that NATO must not withdraw whatsoever, because NATO is a defensive alliance, and never, ever has it demonstrated, especially in recent years, any kind of aggressive behaviors towards Russia. NATO has always adopted a defensive stance, and that is why we, Poles, are a responsible member of the North Atlantic Alliance. It lies in our interest that we keep peace and calm, that no escalation, especially military escalation, happens between NATO and Russia. Generally, we are interested in having no military escalation whatsoever in our part of the world, in our part of Europe. We want to live in peace. We want to develop. Recently, actually, only 30 years ago did we regain our full sovereignty, independence, and freedom, and we would like to be able to further develop our country. We would like to further build our prosperity and our fortune, personal fortune. War or a military threat is the very last thing that Polish people would like to see. They don't want to see it. That is why we are committed to NATO, demonstrating that if any ally was attacked, it would stand shoulder to shoulder, that it is unified in its position. And I think that increasing this defensive presence along the eastern flank of NATO will be beneficial to that, through deploying additional troops and also through committing additional readiness forces within NATO, by reinforcing in this way the forces under the command of SACEUR. But, ladies and gentlemen, there is also a need to strengthen the entire eastern flank along its whole length. I'm not only speaking about the area where Poland has got its border, or I'm not talking about our neighbors, the Baltic states, but I'm also thinking about southern Europe. I believe that along the entire eastern flank, what we need is a reinforcement, a strengthening. It is justified right now. On the upcoming NATO summit, which is ahead of us, I believe that, and I propose this to Mr. Secretary General, I think that we should have meetings in the form NATO Ukraine, NATO Georgia. And by the way, I talked to Madam President of Georgia as well on my way to Beijing. I made a stopover in Tbilisi to have a meeting with Madam President and to talk precisely about security matters, to ask about her perspective. As the head of state located on the eastern side of Ukraine, we are bordering Ukraine on the west and Georgia to the east. And I wanted to see her perspective and ask about her assessment, how she sees the situation, taking into account her experiences of Georgia. I believe that we should invite Georgia at the level of heads of state, and we should have a meeting in format NATO Georgia, and we should have also a meeting NATO Ukraine at the same level to demonstrate our solidarity with these countries and also to show that we are not leaving them to their own devices. They have always been loyal partners of the North Atlantic Alliance, so we should demonstrate to them that NATO also remembers about them. And today, these issues are crucially important also for the credibility of the alliance. Ladies and gentlemen, these were the most important topics that we raised with Secretary General. Once again, thank you for the meeting. Very important to me, and I'm glad that our activities in the era of obvious threats which we are facing are intensive. Let me reiterate, what is most important is demonstrating the unity in every single bit, showing that NATO cannot be divided, does not let itself be divided, countries cooperate with each other, and that the position of NATO is uniform.